Good morning, everyone. Today, let's talk about neutral density filters. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about cameras, and so now you've made the leap to go out and buy yourself a camera and some lenses, and you're shooting some video. So it's time to talk about some more accessories that you're probably going to need if you're shooting out in any harsh light, which inevitably seems to happen no matter what we're doing. So that's where we need to talk about neutral density filters. So sometimes there might be some confusion about, okay, well, why do I need a neutral density filter? The only way we can really begin this conversation is to talk about exposure in general. When you're shooting, there's what's called the exposure triangle, which we can talk a little bit about. The problem is in video that we really have some limitations, or kind of have some limitations with the way in which shutter angle applies. So in general terms, you want your shutter speed to be twice of whatever your frame rate is. So on the Panasonic line, we also have the ability to change shutter angle to actual degrees instead of. So they call it the 180 degree shutter rule. So you can actually change your shutter rule for video to be the degree rule so that it stays at exactly 180 degrees no matter what frame rate you're shooting at, which is a really nice feature. But the problem is that that's one of your three methods of changing exposure, right? So the three methods are your shutter angle, right, degrees. Then you've got your ISO, which is the electronic enhancement, if you want to think of it, of exposure by the sensor. And then you've got your aperture, which is the f-stop, right? And that's just, think of it like the iris of your eye. It's how big or how small the opening is that lets the light come in, the picture come in, and all that stuff. So if you've got ISO and aperture, but you can't change your shutter angle because you're supposed to keep it fixed, then you really only have two things to adjust. So if you're out in bright light and your ISO is already cranked all the way down as low as it'll go, so on the GH5 that's 100 ISO, but things are still really overexposed, too bright for what you're trying to shoot, the only thing you can really adjust is your aperture. So you dial up that aperture to a higher number and that aperture gets smaller so that less light comes in. So what's the negative of that? You can turn it up to f20 or f22 depending upon your camera system and lenses. What's the danger in that? Well, the danger in that is that you lose depth of field. So aperture really can affect how things look with depth of field. So an example is if you've ever had a video or a picture of an item and this item is really crispy and in focus, but the behind is blurry. The reason that people like that, it's called bokeh. People like that because it shows some depth. You can see depth of field. The only way you can get that in video in bright contrast is really to implement an ND filter. ND filters are really like sunglasses for your camera. So when you're outside, a lot of times you want to be able to put some sunglasses on your camera. Now there are a variety of ND filters, but one of the nice things about variable ND filters is that you can adjust with one filter multiple settings. So in other words, you can make the sunglasses darker or lighter. Think of it that way. So this is what they look like. They look something like this. And it's just a little device that is threaded. And so you need to make sure you get the right size to match your camera lenses. For the lenses that I'm using right now, this is a 58 millimeter. And this just screws onto the end of the camera lens. And then if you look closely, you can see that this is adjustable. So you can turn these. And based upon where you turn these, maybe you can see, but it gets lighter or darker. And this will allow you to darken up your scene so that you can keep your aperture more open if you would like to. There are varying types, sizes, number of stops, and quality of ND filters, just like everything else. Perfect example is that this neutral density filter is made by B&W. This is a German company, and it's about $210 You can get it on Amazon or B&H. But what's great about this is, number one, it's all metal exterior. It has actual glass for the neutral density filter material, and it's super smooth and clean. But more importantly is, what does it look like through the lens? How does it affect the quality of your image or the colors in your image? So one of the things that you'll see in some cheaper neutral density filters is the higher that you start darkening the neutral density, you'll begin to get strange aberrations in your video quality. So you might start to see kind of an X pattern is a very popular one. So it'll be kind of darker in some areas, lighter in others. Another potential thing is that you can change the color quality. So the blues of the sky might not look the same with one filter over the other. So you really have to kind of play with these. Another option is, for more budget friendly, is this KNF Concept. This is a company that's available on Amazon, and I would call it kind of the best bang for the buck type ND filter. The nice thing about this is it does use actual real glass in the actual lenses, but the exterior is plastic, and it's not quite as smooth, doesn't feel quite as nice, but also it's $42. So much different in price. But the thing about the KNF Concept is it does have more of an impact on your color and what you see out of it than I would say the B&W does. So you can make some decisions about how important that is to you. Some of these things can be corrected in post-production if need be. But a neutral density filter, if you do any outside work, will become one of those things that you need to become familiar with to be able to continue to play around with that exposure triangle. And we'll do a little video about the exposure triangle later maybe, but basically ND filters, very popular. They do make them in single stop changes. They call them stops, right, in exposure. They have singles, so you can screw on a different one, but the variable is really nice because on the fly, if the light is changing as the day progresses, you can just turn this and adjust it as the day goes by. It's just more flexible, gives you some run and gun abilities that are a little bit harder in regular neutral density filters that you have to change out every time. Give that a thought. Think about it. If you're doing any outside video work, you may have to invest in some ND filters. Just make sure that you check and see what type of lens size you have so that you get the right size to fit the threads that are on the outside of your camera lens. I hope that's helpful. I'll talk to you again soon.